just to be different, this is a video on James E. Jimmy Carter and his policies taken from the viewpoint of a Italian postcard. James E. Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, is still living. In fact, he every morning he wakes up, he sets a new record, his own, for being the longest living president post-presidency. Carter is also the first president from the Deep South since Zachary Taylor. Now, many of you may go, wait a second, Mr. Eads, you told us that Woodrow Wilson's from the South. Yes, that's true. Wilson is from the South, but the textbooks claim he's from New Jersey. Then you might also say, but wait, Mr. Eads, Lyndon Johnson, he's from Texas. Yes, well, Texas is not the Deep South, at least not as deep south as Georgia. Carter's administration developed a reputation for submitting complicated proposals to Congress with great fanfare and then failing to follow up on them. Great idea, great proposal, great party, and then nothing happened. It seemed that whatever matter Carter was considering at the moment just seemed to absorb him entirely. Carter had tunnel vision. Other urgent matters were allowed to drift. Some good about Jimmy Carter. He created a task force to study the problem of draft dodgers, and eventually he offered amnesty to those who fled the country. This allows one Muhammad Ali to come back to the United States. Carter created cabinet level for education. He also signed several environmental initiatives, including bills to establish controls over strip mining, a superfund to clean up chemical waste sites, and a proposal to protect over 100 million acres of Alaskan land from development. Carter also tried to do something about the energy crisis. With a newly created Department of Energy, Carter promised to decrease American reliance on foreign oil and natural gas, expand domestic energy production through new tax incentives, levy new taxes to discourage gasoline use, foster conservatism by encouraging energy-saving measures, and to promote non-petroleum energy sources such as coal and nuclear power. The plan that Carter proposed to Congress included more than 100 provisions. So if you haven't fallen asleep by now over Carter's energy plan, don't worry, Congress did it for you. Congress quickly rejected this 100 provision plus energy plan. This plan had opposition from all sides. Congressmen from oil-producing states opposed the higher taxes on gasoline. Critics of corporate power blocked the deregulation of domestic oil. And most Americans just simply ignored Carter's belief that he was conducting a war on energy. They thought Jimmy Carter was a liar. After Carter's energy plan failed, Carter then called for energy conservatism and alternative sources, such as solar and wind-generated energy, and for a greater use of nuclear energy. But then 3 Mile Island, a nuclear reactor in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, it malfunctioned in 1979, and Americans grew more skeptical of nuclear power. Meanwhile, under Carter, oil prices continued to rise, as OPEC still controlled prices, and OPEC still used the price of oil as a political weapon. 1979, shortages and long lines appeared again. The price of oil increased from $1.80 a barrel in 1970 to more than $30 a barrel in 1980. While these numbers may not scare you, because as recently as 5 years ago, we had barrels of oil over $100 a barrel. In the 1970s, this was indeed scary. Carter also inherited stagflation from the Republicans, but, like Ford and Nixon, could do little about it. Carter promised to lower both unemployment and inflation. He promised to stimulate economic growth, and he promised to balance the federal budget. But by 1980, the economy had simply stopped expanding, unemployment was rising, inflation was topping 13%. Most voters told pollsters that they were worse off than they were in 1976. It would seem that Keynesian economics, or Keynesian economic methods, had run their course. At least Ronald Reagan would say that. New York City had economic problems as well. It was beset by long-term economic issues and short-term mismanagement. Simply put, the city could not meet its financial obligations, nor could it borrow money. The city received a bailout from Congress through federal loan guarantees after private bankers and public officials lobbied Capitol Hill for this bailout. The problem was that the very measures designed to improve the economy, tax cuts, increased government spending on public works projects, deficit spending, and actions by the Fed regarding the interest rate did not help slow inflation brought about by the rising oil prices, which were being set by OPEC. Inflation brought high interest rates, and high interest rates brought a loss of customer confidence and a loss of customer investment in the economy. You might remember from the Great Depression, this is what the lack of confidence and the lack of cash flow is what sunk the nation to the Depression. Same thing is happening here. Conservatives in Congress blamed government spending. And in the last 2 years of Carter's administration, Carter seemed to agree with them, as he argued to reduce capital gains taxes, and he started a process to deregulate businesses, starting with transportation. Carter started cutting government spending. Then in January 1979, Carter's problems just got worse. Iranian militants surrounded the embassy at Tehran in Iran and held everyone hostage. Carter's attempts to free the Americans were absolute failures. And if you want some more good, bad, and the ugly on James E. Jimmy Carter, check out the video assignment for this test called Carter's Foreign Policy. But despite the problems with the Iranian crisis and the economy, Carter proved able to defeat Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy for the Democratic nomination in 1980. Carter's Republican opponent in 1980 was Ronald Reagan. Reagan is the oldest nominee ever for president. His age was not the issue. Reagan looked trim and vigorous and seemed no older than most other prominent politicians. Reagan had grown up a New Deal Democrat, but grew disillusioned with liberalism after World War II. He attacked the influence of communists in the movie industry as president of the Screen Actors Guild. And after his B-movie career ended, Reagan worked for various conservative causes. He campaigned for Goldwater in 1964. Those who supported the Vietnam War loved him after he suggested that the United States level North Vietnam, pave it, paint stripes on it, and make a parking lot out of it. In 1966, Reagan ran for governor of California. And this is what he had to say about the hippies then. Hippies act like Tarzan, look like Jane, smell like Cheetah. Reagan won the election, since hippies don't vote. And even though he professed conservatism and he emphasized the economy, government spending in California increased under Ronald Reagan. But Californians loved him. They re-elected Ronald Reagan in 1970. Fact is, Ronald Reagan appealed to middle and lower class voters who were simply tired of high taxes, welfare programs, wild college students, and challenges to traditional values. You know this group. This is Nixon's silent majority. By 1980, Reagan had become the face of the conservative movement, the neocon movement. Reagan benefited from demographic shifts that brought older Americans into traditionally conservative areas. According to historians George Brown Tyndall and David Shai, this meant that demographics were carrying the United States toward Reagan's conservative political philosophy, and it made it more than just a nostalgic fad. In fact, Reagan's political philosophy will prevail throughout the 80s and the early 90s. Now, one of Reagan's opponents for the nomination refused to accept defeat, and he ran as an independent. This is John Anderson, congressman from Indiana. Anderson believed that both Carter and Reagan had little genuine support, but Anderson did not have much enthusiasm himself. Both Carter and Reagan cried out why the other should not be president. Carter defended his record, such as it was. Reagan spoke out against criminals, drug addicts, and all varieties of immorality, while trumpeting good old-fashioned values, such as patriotism, religion, and family life. If you're writing the word normalcy right beside Ronald Reagan right now, you're right. He wants normalcy. Reagan also favored increased spending on national defense, transferring some of the functions of the federal government back to the states. Oh, and he wanted to cut taxes, like any good neocon Republican. Reagan insisted that he could balance the budget and he could reduce inflation at the same time. Reagan wants to introduce supply-side economics to the mix. Personalities is what won the election here. Reagan had a sunny disposition and an easygoing style. It easily beat out Carter, who by 1980 seemed tight-lipped, seemed tense. Everything Carter had attempted, with the exception of the Camp David Accords in 1978, had failed. Like this guy riding a bicycle, Carter seemed to be going around in circles. Their television debate pointed these differences out. Reagan's demeanor versus Carter's tenseness. And in the debate, when Reagan asked the audience this question, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" Carter was sunk, because all voters could say, no, we're not better off now than we were 4 years ago. And this question conveyed Reagan's message far better than any other policy plank. Just asking Americans, are you better off now, or would you want to change? By 1976, voting was light on election day. Voters still did not trust their politicians. Add distrust to dissatisfaction with the economy and dissatisfaction with the handling of the Iranian hostage crisis. Both of these took their toll on Carter, who fell 8 million votes short in this election. Fact is, the set of domestic and international problems that Carter faced were just too hard for him to overcome. And I'll make the argument that perhaps not even FDR could have pulled this off, having both international and economic problems at the same time. The Republicans also gained control of the Senate thanks to Reagan and cut into the Democratic majority in the House. Reagan wins this election. During the interregnum, Carter devoted himself to solving the Iran hostage crisis, and indirectly, Carter gets help. Iraq, ruled by Saddam Hussein, decided to go to war with Iran in September 1980, hoping to seize territory from Iran. Iraq is victorious early. The early Iraqi victories prompt the Iranians to free the hostages for the return of their frozen assets. Thus, after 440 days in captivity, the 52 hostages at the Iranian embassy were set free on January 20th, the very day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. Thank you for watching this supplemental video on James E. Jimmy Carter, and may the force be with you on your next exam.